The first thing I want to say is that this isn't rapid in the kind of Mark Zuckerberg move fast and break things version of rapid. But there is a thing about how do we ultimately get our democracy, our inside organisations and in our wider societies actually to get to outcomes faster, because part of the thing for us is that what we've got at the moment is a situation where the big decisions we face as societies, as organisations, are kind of piling up around us because it's proving really difficult to make them in ways that stick, right? Whether that's how we face climate change, what we do about pervasive inequality, what we do about like loneliness and mental ill health, how we distribute resources, like these questions are not getting answered because we have systems that are trying to make those decisions for people, this is our hypothesis, rather than making them with people. And at the same time, there are a whole load of processes and mechanics kind of starting to take hold that offer a bit of a solution to that. But to our minds, at least, there's not one mechanic that can do everything. And actually what we need to do is step back a little bit, we think, from a single mechanic to rule them all, a tool that's going to solve everything, and think about what are we actually trying to do here? What is the decision-making process and how do we involve people in it? And if we can split that out, then maybe we can have a chance of doing it. So the starting point for this work, I guess, is our kind of take on the moment in time we're living in. And as many of you know NCP well, you'll start to recognize this table, although now it looks much sexier. This is the two-column version, which is basically our worry, really, is that too many of the people in positions of power and influence in our societies, our organizations, can only really see two versions, two stories of the individual in society as we think about it. They can see the subject story and they can see the consumer story. They see this kind of the subject story rising again, this idea of a kind of authoritarian logic. We can see this thing where the logic is people are subjects, they have stuff done to them, they obey and receive, and the role of organizations and leaders command them. This is a kind of, in times of uncertainty, this kind of logic that the right thing to do is just to establish certainty and tell people what to do becomes really attractive, and we're seeing that in this moment as we're getting more and more stuck with these decisions piling up around us. The strongman leader becomes a kind of attractive archetype. And the only other alternative that many people in positions of power and influence can see is what we call the consumer story. The logic that's been dominant for the last 80 years or so that says actually the right thing to do is the role of organizations and leaders is to serve people, to offer options, that people are inherently self-interested, and what they want to do is demand and choose. And things need to be done for them. And so we get stuck in this, what we would call a kind of consumer democracy, where people's only agency actually is to choose between options that they're offered, where there's a sort of assumption that people are going to make that choice on the basis of self-interest. This is a system that can't face the challenges of our time, because the big challenges are long-term collective interest challenges, and this is a logic that is individualizing, narrowing, short-term, and so we get stuck. And what results is a really dangerous dynamic where people cease to trust institutions, because quite rightly, quite sort of justifiably to an extent, they cease to trust institutions because those institutions don't seem to be able to solve the challenges. But actually, there's another thing going on, which I think is shown and expressed by this idea that people can only see those two possible logics, those two possible ideas, which is that critically institutions don't trust people, right? And we see this in this kind of withdrawing of power into institutions, this logic of the subject kind of rising, that things need to be decided and then imposed, because otherwise there's no way of getting things done. And we see a kind of vicious cycle emerging as a result. As people cease to trust institutions, they get more kind of angry and resentful, and then actually that makes institutions trust them less and draw more power into themselves, because, again, kind of justifiably, it's not an easy time. It's quite a frightening time in some ways, that we can see the anger rising. People in those positions can see the anger. But all that's going to do is create this vicious cycle and end up pushing people into the arms of that kind of subject story. And so the solution, the kind of resolution, and again, those of you who know us will have seen this before, like the idea that we're rooted in, the reason why we're called the New Citizen Project is because where we're starting from is the idea that there's another way of resolving this, another logic. And that logic is that people are citizens, not just subjects or consumers. That people are interdependent. What we do is we want to do stuff together. We want to work with and through organizations. Humans need to participate and create. And in that context, the role of organizations and leaders becomes to facilitate and hold space. And that's really crucial. It's not just about sort of throwing it open. If we can do that, then we think that this, and really what rapid democracy is as a framework, as an offer to people in organizations, institutions, but also for ourselves, to say, can we start to imagine and redesign our institutions on a basis of trusting people, seeing people as citizens, but knowing that that isn't just something that you can just say. It's difficult, and we're going to need ways of doing things that can hold that and make it safe and can build that process. If we can do that, we think we can flip that cycle. And so this is the kind of dream, right? Like we can get to a place where instead of the vicious cycle of people losing trust in institutions, institutions losing trust in people, we can get to a place where institutions start to invest trust in people. People will return that trust. Trust is a reciprocal, and we can get to a much better place. So that's a lovely dream, right? But how does it work? Well, when we were thinking about this, working with this, we came across work done originally quite a while ago by Bain Consulting, not the most obvious place in some minds, although they do some wonderful work, obviously. There's a Bain partner sitting over there. And Bain have this framework that they put out into the world a good few years ago now called RAPID. And what this does is it's an articulation, so that the problem they recognized in corporate decision-making was they basically said, businesses tend to go wrong. I'm going to grossly oversimplify for these purposes. Businesses tend to go wrong when too few people hold too much power in the decision-making process, play too many of the roles in a decision. When, for grossly oversimplified, as I say, when the chief executive makes the decision, imposes it on the organization, things go wrong. The decisions get unpicked, the decisions aren't good enough, and those are the two critical characteristics. You lose legitimacy because you haven't got people involved, and you have lower quality because you haven't drawn on enough diversity of input. And that feels to us like a pretty good analogy for the current state of our democracies, the current state of more participatory organizations, the current state of decision-making on the big challenges of our time. So Bain's response inside organizations was to create a lovely acronym, because they're very slick consultants, and to do it in a diagram that made you just about able to follow it in the order that the letters come. So they went recommend, agree, perform, input, decide. You can go round in a beautiful circle. And in Bain's work, this was about separating out the roles in a decision and saying, if you get the right people playing the right roles, then you can get to the best possible decision. What we've done with support and input from those guys is we've said, well, actually, if we apply that to a democratic context, if we start to use that as a framework to understand how different participatory approaches and methodologies might come together, then we probably have to make a linear process rather than just sort of put it on a nice diagram, which kind of messes up the acronym, but does seem to work. So if you'll bear with us with the acronym IRADPA, you can kind of see why we didn't rename it, right? We get to a place where you go, actually, what if we can put these in order and go, actually, what we want to do is get input, then develop recommendations, then have a kind of agree moment, then decide, make the actual commitment, and then get into the implementation and performance. And if we can do those things in the right ways, in the right order, with the right people at the right times, then we might well be able to get to a place where things can move a little more powerfully. So I'm going to walk through these and just give you a bit of a sense of them to unpack this framework. First one, input. This is basically the moment, and I think for us, the key to this was saying, actually, there is an importance in opening things up and inviting input from everywhere, and going to seek the people who really have a stake in stuff. And so one of my favorite examples of this, so is the Mexico City crowdsourcing its constitution. They got something like 500 ideas with votes from 400,000 people. Like when you open these things up, when you create, you can really make something creative and joyful and very publicly visible happen at this phase, where you can invite a load of input from a load of different places. And critically here, you don't necessarily need, when you're looking for input, in the original Bain work, they talked about those who provide input need to sort of accept, or it needs to be clearly contracted, that input isn't all going to be reflected in the final decision. But there is a moment for gathering it and acknowledging it. And if you're clear with people that might not come through, that can still be a really generative thing and something people want to be part of. So firstly, input gathering, and what you're looking for is everyone who has a stake in the question of whatever kind. You can go into places where there's real, and sometimes there's a role for using processes like, we really love the work on legislative theatre. There's links and more detail in this where actually you're working with people with lived experience of a really difficult issue to tell their own stories and bring up their own ideas. Sometimes you need, in an input phase, those kind of really concentrated process to draw out the ideas. So you go to the people for whom it really matters most. And sometimes it's just about sort of opening up and gathering from everywhere. The logic is you're really inviting, encouraging input, and the underlying kind of logic of this is actually the core insight, the core idea of New Citizen Project. All of us are smarter than any of us. Once you've got that input, though, too many processes, in our current moment, ask questions like, what do you want to happen? And then all those ideas just disappear, right? And that creates more frustration. So the next phase is a kind of digestion. This is the recommend phase. And for those of you who are kind of citizens assembly lovers, fans, we are too. This is where we see assemblies in particular, citizens juries playing a really powerful role. So for those who don't know them, the concept of a citizens assembly or a citizens jury is you basically develop what's called a mini public. So you select a randomly selected but representative sample of a population, and you create an opportunity for them to actually really deeply engage. We've come to think of this in the context of this rapid work as a sort of digestion, as I say. Like, you gather the input, and then this is a group of people who can digest. Here, that kind of representation, thinking about representation really clearly, is vital, because this is where you really need to develop that legitimacy. In the original Bain work and corporate decision making, they talk about this being the people who are kind of most impacted by the decision. They need to be able to have ownership of the recommendation, the direction of travel. The lovely quote at the bottom of this thing about why here, our friend Claudia Schwallis, who leads Democracy Next, an organisation you should all check out and is doing pioneering work on assemblies, talks about this logic of assemblies and juries being really great at transforming public opinion, a sort of reactive opinion, into considered public judgment, that digestion kind of metaphor again. So once we've gathered all that input, think of a giant funnel, and then we kind of digested, what next? Well, we think this is where the agree phase is kind of where you need a kind of, I sometimes think of this as like the speak now or forever hold your peace moment at a wedding, right? Like there's a kind of we need to check, we need to be sure, and actually, like, some of this work for us is about not throwing out the babies of the really good, strong parts of our existing democratic process with the bathwater of the stuff that isn't working. Consultation processes, standard consultation processes, are actually really good at this kind of thing. The problem is that they're all we do. And really what this is about is saying, like, let's just take a moment. We think we know where we're going. We've got a recommendation. We've got a kind of sense of what we want to do. But let's take a moment and understand it. That would be a really good use of the existing consultation processes and methods. Like holding that thing going, we've got this far, before we commit, help us understand it. Let's flesh out and build consensus around this plan. And only then, and you can sometimes be in a little cycle between the recommendation and the agree, only then do you go to the decide moment? And the critical thing, one of the things I really like in the original Bain work, like this idea that the decision, the actual decision, is only really the moment of committing the organisation to a direction of travel. It's not the whole thing, right? And so in this might actually be a really good role for in certain scales of decision where not everyone wants to be involved in everything. Like there is potentially a good role for existing elected representatives in kind of making that decision. A bit like the CEO in the original kind of corporate inspiration. It's not wrong for the CEO to kind of make the commitment of the direction of travel. What's wrong is if they do all of the work that leads up to that and just impose it on the organisation. And that too often feels like where we are with our existing democratic process, I think. So moment of commitment. Sometimes this can be a really, again, one of the things that's happened in this country, I think, is a lot of people have started to lose faith in things like referenda. We actually think this sort of framework can give us faith in that sort of process back if you put it in the right role. So the lovely example of the Irish process, many people will know in this room, if you think about recommend, agree, decide, in Ireland, the way that worked was in the abortion referendum, 2016, there was the Citizens' Assembly in Ireland, 99 randomly selected citizens deliberating for 5 weekends over 5 months, got to the recommendation to legalise access to abortion up to 12 weeks. That was the recommend phase. Put that to the politicians to sort of take a moment. The elected politicians, they were actually in this process in the agree function. They sort of had an opportunity to consult and make sure that nothing had been missed. And then actually the decision in that process was a referendum. That was the thing that made the decision. If you get those in the right order, in the right place, then you can have a process that actually builds cohesion and legitimacy rather than one that undermines it and divides. And then finally, and this is why I actually, for all that I joke that the reason we've stuck with RAPID is because IRADPA is a terrible acronym. It's actually because, and in the original framework as well, the whole idea is that if you get the right people involved at the right stages, then when you get to the implementation, when you get to the perform phase, people feel ownership of that. People feel engaged in it. People have a role in it and a stake in it. And so therefore, when the decision comes to implementation, you're flying. And so things ultimately do move quicker. This is where it is actually more rapid to do this kind of thing. Slow, then fast. And we also, like, there's a huge role for participatory approaches in this as well. We'll hear a bit later on about an example of putting matched crowdfunding, for example, into this sort of space. So if you develop a set of recommendations in a participatory way that aren't just for the state, but are also for what communities can do, and then you put some money into that to support what communities want to do with those decisions, then you're actually making the implementation a participatory thing as well. So we're going to get into some examples in the discussion in a little bit, but just to give you a bit of a frame of them, and also to make one point I think is really important. I've sort of, for simplicity, and I've talked primarily with the voice of formal democracy, kind of our political democracy. But our thing actually, and the experimentation we've been engaged in, as Polly says, we've got people from NGOs, from government, and from business, and we think actually there's a role and an opportunity to work from any of those places. The beauty of this is it doesn't have to. If you can use these processes in the right way, you can also make a process famous such that you conduct energy into it, and so it doesn't have to necessarily just be commissioned by a government. We have got an example, though, of a government starting this. Jersey's climate conversation was about saying, the government of Jersey saying, how can we work together as an island? What's our role in this? And what can other people do? Using this kind of framework to develop their kind of their plan. The Body Shop, a business work that we'll hear more about, the Youth Collective as a way of integrating the voice of young people into the governance of the Body Shop through this kind of framework. And then the People's Plan for Nature, my like personal kind of favourite of these in many ways, much as I love the others, sorry. Charlotte and Stephen are going to heckle me. But is an example of saying, well, what if we could work as a coalition actually from outside government? If we can think about this framework as a way to run a process that can actually work with people, develop a set of recommendations, and then, kind of challenge a little bit. Say, like, we're creating the space. I've become really obsessed with this idea of creating the space for our politics to move into. I'm really worried at the moment there's a bit of a sense in this country that we're sort of waiting for a new government to do everything for us, and that's us being complicit, to my mind, in a consumer story. I think this sort of process, actually, if we can build the coalitions as we're here, we can initiate a process from outside that then invites government into it. So it doesn't really matter whether you're an NGO or a business or whether you have a role in government. You can sort of start to think with this framework, I think. The thing that does matter is what question you're asking. And we're going to come back to this throughout this morning, but this idea of what's the question that you're holding, that you're structuring a rapid process around, is the essential starting point. And we offer this framework in our work of how can we work together with X to achieve Y. So think as you're mulling this. With the Jersey climate conversation, it was really how can the Jersey government, we as the government of Jersey, work together with the people of Jersey to achieve net zero. With the body shop, it's like how can the body shop's executive team, executive leadership work with young people to lead the body shop in a way that is true to its values and vision. And with People's Plan for Nature, it was really how can conservation NGOs work together with the people of the country to develop a plan to actually bring British nature back from the brink. And if you start with the right kind of question and then you work through these phases, we think you can kind of hold that process from anywhere. So we're going to get into those case studies in a minute, but before we do,